Today, I have my first podcast interview with people I've never met on a topic quite fascinating for all Nebraskans and people who love this state. This is How to Speak Nebraskan. I had a cool opportunity recently to interview two young and up-and-coming writers from the Flatwater Free Press. I'm still old school when it comes to the news. I actually wish more people my age and younger were. In other words, I like to read the newspaper. I love the newspaper. I grew up in Kearney, where my parents got the Kearney Hub delivered every day. It was in the afternoon. I even had a friend who I helped on his paper route sometimes after school in 6th and 7th grade. I have really fond memories of that. On Sundays, my parents would get the Omaha World Herald for I felt like the more statewide news and like more what's going on. And back then, of course, we didn't have smartphones distracting us all the time. And the newspaper was something kind of new each day, and you could look at it and learn something and have something kind of entertaining. I mostly read the comics and the sports page as a young kid, and then as I grew up, I got more into reading articles and headlines throughout high school, and of course, as I got older. Now living in Lincoln, I read the Lincoln Journal-Star almost every day. I love it. I am thankful that we have the Journal-Star because it's a good quality paper. It features stories, of course, here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and there's plenty of AP articles about stories around the country and around the world. And even though they don't have the readership that they used to have, I've really come to realize what we have is special here in Nebraska. My mom and stepdad live down in Pensacola, Florida, and their local paper is not nearly the quality that what we have here in Nebraska with the Journal-Star, the World Herald, and other maybe local papers. My parents-in-law, my wife's parents, live down in Southern Illinois. They're outside of St. Louis. If they want like a local newspaper, the nearest one is really like the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The local news they have in the area that's really not much to speak of. And so, I'm sure the St. Louis Post-Dispatch is fine, but it's not talking a lot about what's going on in suburban Southern Illinois. And I don't know what is going on there. I don't know if there's any of that interesting or not. That's why I've been intrigued lately, because I've started seeing articles in our local newspapers here that have been written by the Flatwater Free Press. It's a relatively new nonprofit organization that is Nebraska's first independent nonprofit newsroom focused on investigations and feature stories that matter. That's what's on their website. Now, just so you all know, I am not part of the Flatwater Free Press, but I'll admit I'm seeing more and more stories run by them that I kind of hope to feature some of their writers and see what they're doing, because there actually is a lot of cool things, and you can even check out their website. My interview today is with two writers who have been doing an interesting news story here the last few months called Who's Buying Nebraska? It's a look at different entities that have been buying up Nebraska land in large quantities. I noticed over the course of several weeks, I'd be reading the newspaper and I'd see an article on Who's Buying Nebraska, and I started to realize there's a theme here. Sometimes I need to get knocked over the head to connect the dots. But here I saw it. I was like, Who's Buying Nebraska? I read a pretty interesting article. A few weeks later, I see another one, and I noticed that they were all being written by somebody from the Flatwater Free Press, which is who I'll be bringing here today. And so I have two individuals that I'm going to be speaking with today who spent many, many hours on multiple articles called Who's Buying Nebraska? The first individual that I reached out to who was, featured in the newspaper is Yanqi Xu, who's a senior investigative reporter at the Flatwater Free Press. She spent time covering stories on water quality in Nebraska, and most recently this Who's Buying Nebraska story. She's also spent time in North Carolina, Washington, D.C. She reports on courts and politics. She's not from the United States originally. She's actually from China, but came to the U.S. for college and graduated from the University of Missouri over in Columbia. The other person I'm interviewing is Destiny Herbers. She's working as a fellow this year at the Flatwater Free Press and originally from Michigan. I won't hold that against her. She earned a master's degree in data journalism at the University of Maryland. Neither Yanqi or Destiny are from Nebraska, and I think that helps them in this story here. When we grow up close to something, we tend to have stronger points of view on various things that are close to us and that are near and dear to our heart. Sometimes you need someone from the outside, I think, that can just kind of come in with a fresh approach and just kind of see what's going on. And I really felt like that is what was happening in their writing here. They are able to come in, see what's happening as they're going through kind of this investigative journalism journey that they had, and then simply report it. In my opinion, That's how journalism should be. It should tell us what is happening and offer different perspectives and different points of view, and then allow the readers to decide how they feel. So without further ado, let me welcome Yanqi and Destiny. Destiny, how are you both doing today?
Good. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes, absolutely. So, like I said, I've been reading your articles. I find them fascinating. And so I want to just say, when I've read, just to kind of lay this out a little bit, you had a story out there on some of the top buyers of land, the Church of Latter-day Saints. Bill Gates is apparently buying our land. We've got tech giants buying land. It's startling. Were you, Yinchi, kind of starting with you, and then feel free, Destiny, to kind of pipe in. Has this been a surprise to you, or what got you, first off, what kind of got you started on looking into this as a topic?
Yeah, thanks. This is Yanqi. Hi. So we got into this topic mainly because there's a data journalism class. The story originated, or the series originated, from this UNL class, the College of Journalism and Mass Communications data journalism class. I think a student was interested in finding out whether some of the th kind of the things that he had heard about, um, whose Buying Nebraska was true, and so that he and this journalism professor Matt Waite, uh, sat down and tried to request data related to it. It took them a couple of tries, I think. So the whole journalism class got involved. It took them a couple of tries to figure out what data to request, but they eventually landed on the right data set to answer this question. Um, because they were first interested in Bill Gates, because you hear about people talking about Bill Gates buying up a lot of Nebraska land. So they found that the State Department of Revenue actually compiles a data set of land sales transactions in the state. And so they narrowed it down to ag land sales so that we could see who's purchased ag land. Sometimes there's like ag land and non-ag land, uh, both in the same sale, but there's a way to filter that type of land sales out, and so that they requested 5 years of data from 2018 to 2022, and that covers every county in the state, and then that captures, all the land sales related to ag land and in the past few years. And so that offers great insight because that's literally every sale that's happened. So we partnered with the data journalism class, actually sat in their newsrooms a couple of times to or sat in their classrooms a couple of times to go through some data analysis with students, and then they also did a lot of initial research on who these top buyers might be, because sometimes you only get an address and you have a very obscure LLC that may not really tell you a whole lot about who's behind that entity. So they did a lot of the work on the front end, and then we kind of picked it up and did a lot more data cleaning to come up with the stories about which buyers we should focus on.
Okay. How do you, just out of curiosity, starting with the early parts, how do you both divide this up? Are one of you taking a story at a time? Do you kind of co-write these things together? How are you kind of dividing up, like how you work on this project together?
We co-bylined the first story in the series, but Yenchi did all of the actual writing for that story. I was doing the data cleaning and preparing the front-facing tables of buyers that went out with that and their summaries and information. So that one we kind of shared the work on. But then every story after that, we sort of tried to alternate as much as possible, writing it completely ourselves to get them out. as fast as possible.
That sounds like an insane amount of data cleaning, I would imagine, to get everything prepared.
It was insane. Our process used a lot of different tools and techniques. We kept jumping around from different coding languages into Google Sheets and all over the place.
Yeah, because a
Wow.
lot of times, like you come up with this data set because the central question we're trying to answer um, was who's buying Nebraska. So we wanted the top buyers. So the top buyers was really like a really important list for us to come up with, but then that involved a lot of data cleaning just to standardize buyer names because sometimes you have two entries, it's actually the same person, it could like greatly throw things off. So a lot of the data cleaning revolved around standardizing buyer names, and Destiny really used this program called Open Refine to standardize it to begin with. And then during that process, we also saw a few entries that seemed really out of whack. So, um, the journalism class actually identified some of those entries and called the county assessor's offices to determine whether that data entry was correct. And so it turned out some of them were, so the decimal points were actually off because of various reasons. So the original data was flawed, and so that we had to actually call county assessor's offices a couple of times, probably more than a couple of times, a bunch of times
I
to.
called 37 county assessor offices.
Really? Oh my gosh. Okay,
Yeah.
so just okay, like kind of I'm just curious this process. So you were getting the data, you're going through it. It sounds like a huge process. 37 counties. So you're just calling all the counties in various parts where this land has been purchased. And what were you trying to do when you called them? You're just trying to kind of confirm like is this accurate or trying to understand something better?
Yeah, I'd have a sale where like the number looked really weird, like way too big or way too small. And so I'd call them, I'd give them the parcel ID number and say, can you just take a second look with me? Like this number looks way too big. And in almost every case, the assessor was like, oh yeah, our system doesn't recognize decimals correctly. That wasn't input right. The number is actually
Oh my
like
gosh.
100 times less than what you thought it was.
Oh my
So that
gosh.
was a little stressful. We had to sanity check pretty much everything, which is why we ended up publishing a top 100 list only. Because if we had sanity checked further than that, it would have taken us more months to get the
Yeah.
data out.
That's wild. So let's just kind of talk about some of the top buyers and how you found out that they were the ones buying, and then also kind of what surprised you or kind of maybe where it's led. So one of them, which again, every time I read an article, I was like surprised, like who's buying Russell? I was like, huh. And so after I went through this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love to dig deeper into this. So one of the top single buyer of land in the state of Nebraska over the last few years, you can kind of clean this up for me, whatever I'm saying, is as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what do you know about that? Why are they buying land? Where are they buying it? Have you talked to anybody associated with that purchase or anything? So I'm curious to kind of start with that.
Yeah, they have been buying land here for quite a long time. And they were one of the few entities where we were actually able to get total ownership data. There's several groups that track transparency in the church that we were able to cross-reference our ownership records and estimates with their ownership records and estimates and get the number that we felt really confident in, which was about 370,000 acres that they own. Most of that in the Sandhills, Garden County, Morrill County, surrounding counties. And they ranch. They ranch all of that land themselves. They do it for profit exclusively. They sell the meat on the open market. So pretty much like any other ranching company, except for it's owned by a massive multi-billion-dollar church.
Really? Okay, that's what I was curious. I was like, what are they doing? Are they going to build churches out there? Are they going to like what is it? What is happening? So, and so they're ranching the land just as you would see a major company do. It's very unique because it's a church and you typically would not see that.
Yeah, they own more land in other places in Nebraska that's zoned for different uses. We were solely looking at what they have zoned for agriculture, which are ranches that they own themselves. The system is called Rex Ranch. Yeah, and it spans most of the Sandhills.
Interesting. And then you had another article that Bill Gates has spent a significant amount of money on Nebraska land. Only that article was interesting because that seemed like it was not as easy to nail down that it was Bill Gates buying the land. Is that correct?
No, and that was actually it was so funny. He kept coming on and off of our story list because at first we thought he was in the top 100 list of buyers, but he actually wasn't. That was the data journalism class had been looking for him and hadn't found him. So then he was off of our story list. But then I was looking into foreign ownership data, the FIDA database to write the foreign ownership story. And I kept seeing these LLCs that were all headquartered in Illinois in like the suburbs of St. Louis, and they all had the same address. And they were all these weird farm LLCs that were registered as foreign entities with no associated country. So I was like, what are these? And I dug into those for a long time. I found a record that the DNR had of water wells being transferred from one of those LLCs to an LLC we knew was owned by Bill Gates, which is Mount Edna Farms. And then once I realized that that transfer had happened, I realized that Bill Gates owned that LLC now, the original farm LLC. And then I was able to find reporting that some other reporters had done with the land report, basically showcasing this weird turn of hands that happened with this like 20,000 acre plot chunk of land. It's really everywhere, but like it was sold as one chunk that had passed from this original investment group, who was the one who was headquartered in Illinois, to the Canadian Pension Board. So for a time, it was
Okay.
owned by the government of Canada, and they were like financing retirement on it, and then bought in lump sum by Bill Gates in 2017, which is why he didn't appear in our original data, because we didn't look at data from 2017 initially. Then I was like, oh, Bill Gates is back on the story list. I better find out what's happening with this land.
Wow. Do you know, okay, what's he doing with that land? What's happening with that? Do you know? I mean, is it just really is it used to
He,
ranch and make the money off of it and use that for other things or
yeah, he leases it to local farmers, and most of those farmers are the same people who have been leasing and farming it when it was owned by every other investor before this. So not a lot has actually changed for Nebraskans as it's changed hands. And his personal investors have confirmed that that land is only being used for his financial investments. So it's got nothing to do with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and their agricultural research. It's solely to generate money for Bill Gates himself. So that was interesting to find out. And then I also found record of a deed of trust that he's taken out against his land for like $700 million, which is quite a lot of money. That
interesting?
basically is like a loan to get liquid cash in untaxable way. And obviously, I don't know why he took that loan out. There's no way we can know it, but we know that he did take that money out.
So it seems it's a really an investment thing. It seems like that's the
Mm-hmm.
purpose behind what he's doing. It appears, at least at this point for that. You have mentioned something that was a little bit. So those two, when you think of the first two topics we kind of talked about, that's very much rural Nebraska, farming, ranching, primarily is what that land is used for. You also talked about tech giants buying large areas of land kind of near Lincoln and Omaha. So talk about a little bit about who are these tech giants? Where are they buying the land for and what are they doing?
Yeah, so these tech giants have been buying land mostly in like areas like near the Omaha and Lincoln metro areas, to bring in these giant warehousey types of buildings to house computers or machines to store data. So they're called data centers. And the reason why I heard is they're building these data centers like everywhere in the country almost, but then they tend to build close to major highways, so that, and then in places where they can get access to good internet fiber network, and also um, places where they can also get some sort of tax incentives. So, and then of course you need a lot of land for, you know, these giant data centers. And for example, uh, Meta, formerly
Mm-hmm.
known as Facebook, they
Yeah.
purchased land. So they came first and purchased land in Sarpy County, near um, like in the Papillion area,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
uh, so they bought land and s slowly started kind of building these data centers, and it actually came in different phases. So they were expanding as well. So they started in 2017, I believe. And then of course that came after, you know, like years of like negotiations with the local governments, and then they had to like go out and find willing sellers who would, sell their land. And it was actually worth a lot of money, like a land sale could easily, be a couple $1 million for, 100, 200 acres. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so Facebook bought, you know, they spent a couple $1 million on you know, the land in Sarpy County, and then Google also came here. So through different LLCs, they bought land in Northwest Omaha, also in Sarpy County, actually pretty close to the Facebook site, and then they also bought land in Lancaster County, in Lincoln. And if you go on our website and read the story about these tech giants, you can actually see where the land is, and it's quite something. It's some pretty giant chunks of land that used to be farmland, and right now is like is adding to the urban sprawl, if you will.
Yeah. Absolutely. So those have been a few of the big purchases. You have another story about, well, a couple of foreign companies' involvement in land that they're not maybe owning it like outright, but maybe can you talk a little bit about the foreign companies' kind of involvement with the land in Nebraska? I thought that was kind of intriguing.
Yeah, that was something we really wanted to answer and address in this series because we get a lot of comments on social media. I'm sure you've seen people speculating that certain countries are buying all of this farmland in Nebraska and that that's something to be afraid of. That's not really the case. By and far, we have a lot of data on who has interest in farmland um, that the USDA collects, and it's overwhelmingly Canada. Canada and
Oh,
Italy
really?
make up like over
Italy?
90% of, yeah.
Italy.
Canada
Well,
and Italy both run wind farms here.
oh gosh, maybe Italy should help provide
Yeah.
some like trips for us. We can go like check out Venice and Rome and all that stuff like that too. So interesting. So they run wind
Yeah.
farms.
Yeah. And I think that the number of acres that are in foreign interest has been misportrayed sometimes in the media or by people giving testimony. It's a number in the hundreds of thousands. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it looks alarming when you see it. But the reality is, the vast majority of that land is wind farm easements from Canada and Italy, not
Gotcha. So in easement,
really.
so yeah, to kind of clarify what you're saying. So in other words, they don't actually when there's a wind farm and you see these giant wind turbines out there, you're saying that they actually don't own the land. Someone else owns the land, and are they kind of like leasing space essentially to use a wind turbine then for the energy? Is that what it is? So they're running like a company, use like sort of renting property. Is that a way to frame it?
Yeah, they sign a contract with the landowner to put in the wind turbine, which is about 200 feet across, and then the access road to the turbine to the main road. And that's really all of what the land that they get to access is their turbine and their access road. And the farmers will graze right up to it. The farmer that I talked to for that story, his cows literally eat the grass right at the base of the windmill. They don't really care what's going on in there. Um, but when you look at the easement contract and the amount of acres that are logged in the USDA's data, it's all of the acres under contract. So it's all of the land under contract, not the land they actually use. So all of that farmer's acreage might be under contract, but really the windmills have to be spaced out, and all of the land between them that isn't the actual windmill nothing is happening with it. It is fully being farmed and owned by the farmer. So that's where those numbers can get really inflated, and look alarming if you don't know what they mean.
Interesting. Yeah. In
Yeah.
Nebraska, and we have a, oh, sorry, go ahead, Yanqi.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that that there's actually a provision in our state constitution that actually prohibits foreign owners of land.
So, one interesting kind of other article that you wrote is you're talking about tribes that have been buying Nebraska land, which is fascinating, and that's kind of a totally like kind of different perspective, right? So I feel like these other topics, we're kind of talking a little bit about wealthy either individuals or companies to some degree of some sort of investment. And here we're talking about tribes of Nebraska, the Winnebago tribe, the Ponca tribe of Nebraska, and the Iowa tribe of Nebraska. You said has been buying land here too. Can you talk just a little bit about what you've been seeing with that?
Yeah, so I wrote that story a couple months before the land project really kicked off. It was in collaboration with the Rural News Network, addressing some issues that people of color face in rural communities. And I had been looking at some of the proprietary land sale data, like before all the processing we did, and I filtered out pretty much any tribe that has any Nebraska affiliation to see if they were buying land and what those prices look like. And what I found out was the prices are much higher than is average for where they were buying and the amount that they were buying. So I talked with the Winnebago tribe with Ho Chunk. They were really welcoming, and invited me up there to go see their farming operations and talk to them. And I found out how checkerboarded their reservation was. And for the first time, I really understood that like a reservation is not actually reserved for Native Americans to own land on. Like a lot of that land is still owned by white people, and now they have to buy it back if they want to actually own their reservation. So it was just like totally shocking and eye opening for me. And it was before we even really knew what direction the project was going to take. But I think it still exemplifies a lot of the themes that we ran into later in the project, where if you're a small farmer who's looking to start now, it's much harder to buy when you're going up against people who can really name any price that they want to name and someone's going to buy it.
Absolutely. And that was an eye opener for me reading your article. So you enlightened me too. So I appreciate that. I also the reservations from where I live, they're far away. I have not been there, and I guess I kind of picture them, just being this area that the Native American tribes are at, and I don't really think about what's up there. Who's I know, you picture these small communities and kind of just sort of this open space, and what you're saying is just like when you're driving through other parts of the state and you go by, any type of farmland, could be, your corn or wheat or soybeans, whatever like that, ranch land, anything along those lines. You actually might be driving through reservation and you just would not really know it. It looks the same pretty much in some spots.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the farming that's done on land that's supposed to be reservation land by treaty boundaries and what you see when you look on Google Maps, most of that land is actually owned and farmed by white people.
Interesting. And so tribes right now are trying to buy the land back. They're in many cases they're being overcharged for the land too, which has been a big challenge. But one inspiring thing is they seem like they're up for the challenge. Hopefully they can get a little bit of help in some way. I don't know how that would be, but it does seem as though they're just trying to take ownership back at a minimum of the reservation land that they've had. Is that right?
Yeah. The tribes that I talked with, they really just want to own their reservations at this point, and they
Okay.
seem willing to do anything to get there.
Gotcha. Yep, and that's understandable and respectable too, for sure. Absolutely. What has been some of the biggest surprise? I know you've had other stories on this too. We've kind of covered some of the big highlights here. What's been some of the bigger surprises that some of you had, or just maybe eye-opening moments, perhaps?
Um, I can go first. I think not so much surprising, I'd say, but like, just the magnitude of, how many of those top buyers, how many of uh out of state and big corporations are overrepresented in that list, because I think that we all know that, you know, how people like picture a farmer these days could be quite different from kind of the reality when you have a lot of consolidation going on. But we didn't really know the true scope of it. But then what we found was a lot of these big corporations are definitely very overrepresented in the top buyers kind of pool. Like if, and then that means that, you know, when you have a really competitive market, that that price of land could really, you know, um, determine like how you could make a living and, if you could even get into the business if you were starting farmer. So that we've heard from some small farmers that it's impossible for them these days when you have these big buyers kind of um, buying up a lot of land and, essentially pricing them out. The smaller farmers makes it much harder for them to start. Um, and that is something that we've seen, and and an investor pool seems to be growing still.
Yeah, you did. Because one, I don't have the name in front of me right now, and I wish I did at the moment. There was a certain, I believe, a farmer that you profiled who's lived here for a while, who did talk about that. He would like to buy more land, but he just feels like he can't compete. So, have you had a chance to talk to a few of those farmers in this process at all, or and kind of, it sounds like you talked to this one individual at least a little bit about kind of his kind of challenges with that. Is that been something you've been able to observe and talk to people about?
We didn't get a chance to kind of like go to an auction or something like that. We just kind of heard it from him and some other sources who might not have direct knowledge of it, or kind of have seen they've seen this, but not like maybe not like direct. It's not their experience per se, so that um, we've heard about it, and and that this also seems to be a common thing, kind of sentiment expressed by a lot of young farmers. We cited this study, the survey about younger farmers, and a lot of them like are not starting out owning their land. A lot of them are starting out as farm managers, apprentices, and just like in more of an auxiliary role to someone else instead of just, being able to own land, which is not, I guess, which has always kind of been the case, right? You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
mm, but the, you know, like these days, there seems to be a change still, in terms of how long it would take you to get to the place where you're actually owning your own land and how much you can own, especially um, as the number of farmers seems to have really dwindled, over the years.
Yeah. Because one of the things you had kind of brought up somewhere is like, Ted Turner was kind of one of the people early on. I remember back, I think kind of in the 1980s or 90s, kind of in the 90s, because I even kind of remember hearing about Ted Turner buying all this land. And then a friend of mine who lives out in Western Nebraska this is like 20 years ago, made a comment to me about, when some families sell out, they kind of, when they sell to Ted Turner, they're kind of viewed as a sellout a little bit. You did this. And, I read about that, and it sounds like Ted Turner still owns over 400,000 acres. And it is a little bit with mixed feelings. On one hand, it's sad to see the family on farm go. On the other hand, he's promoting bringing bison back and all of that, and kind of more and more of nature settings. And I think there's something that's kind of nice about that as well. Did you talk? Did the Ted Turner thing come up in any conversations with anybody? Was that a topic of conversation? Everybody make any references to him?
A lot of the time. He's definitely Nebraska's most famous longtime landowner. He's
Oh yeah.
always brought up in conversation. Yeah, but kind of on the point that like he does good too. He does major conservation projects. That was something that I ran into, especially as I was writing about some of these, like demigorgons that you hear about in our Twitter replies all the time. Bill Gates, China, the Mormon Church. Um, there are lots of people who aren't mad about what's happening too. Lots of people on the ground. Like the farmer that I talked to who has wind farms on his properties, he loves it. He had nothing negative to say. And I talked to people who live in the community where a lot of Bill Gates's land is. Farmers haven't changed. Like the same people are
Hmm.
still farming that land that were for years beforehand. So I think, you know, nothing is simple or straightforward or evil in this series. And that was definitely something that surprised me, was a lot of people have pretty nuanced opinions and views of it, especially people who live in those communities and are working with those people every day. Like I heard all the time, the Mormon church are good neighbors.
Okay.
They help us out with our ranching too.
Yeah.
Like it's easy when you're not in the situation and actually buy the land where these things are happening to feel, I think, maybe disproportionately afraid of how things are trending. And I mean, maybe they're trending in a bad way. We can't make those calls, but there are plenty of
Right.
people who are also satisfied with what's happening.
That is refreshing to hear because you hear it initially, you do kind of be like, what is that person doing? What is that group doing? Like, why are they doing that? But you're right. I think if it's one of those things, if they are showing appreciation for the land and for the communities and the individuals that they work with, that's not such a bad thing, right? That's in fact that's a good thing. You want that because I think sometimes when you think about somebody moving in, it's easy to have this kind of thought of like they're gonna just change everything, and I don't know what we fear about that, but it seems like there's maybe cause to maybe acknowledge that we know that is happening and maybe think through what could be some consequences that might be negative in some ways and also in other ways there could be some positives. So Destiny, what have been what's been some observations that you've had in this process that sticks out to you?
I mean, there's a negative side to things too. Definitely when smaller parcels get consolidated under a large investor, like the original investment company that owned Bill Gates's parcels, those don't tend to be split up again amongst individual farmers and owners. So Bill Gates owns land in like, I think 19 counties. And my guess would be that that land would is not going to be split to multiple owners' hands again. It's passed now through three different investors. So I think that's one of the things to look out for is that, as land gets consolidated under these large, ultra wealthy hands or gets consolidated into something like the data centers project, that's land that we're losing from small farmers and has the potential to be taken out and moved into a different type of use. Which, who's saying if that's positive or negative? Ted Turner's land, a portion of it has also changed use now. It's for bison research. So it could be positive, it could be negative, but either way, it's land that is changing.
It's interesting. Where does the story go from here? Is this series done yet? Do you have more similar articles that are coming out that are going to be highlighting new things? As what's where does this kind of go from where you're at this point?
I think we're done for now. But if there's anything that's super interesting that we have not found, people want to talk about, they can always come to us and bring it to our attention because we were largely focusing on top buyers, essentially in the original series, and you know, and but we also do recognize that we only had 4 years of data, and also it's not ownership data; it's just transaction data. So. Uh, we were trying to be as comprehensive as possible, but we know that there are potential stories that we're not catching, So if you know anything, get in touch with us. But otherwise, I think that we're probably good for now.
Good for now in this series. Well, it's been a great series. Um, so, kind of switching gears just a little bit, I am kind of curious just a little bit about each of you real quick. How did you decide to go into this investigative journalism thing? It seems very fascinating. I would imagine it's kind of exciting that you're learning new information and putting it together and bringing it out to us, which I really appreciate. I think is really good. How did you each get into investigative journalism? Whoever wants
Destiny,
to
do
go
you want to
first.
go first?
I can go first. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was pretty heavy set on going into foreign service. I really wanted to be working in like the international NGO sector or something like that. But then when I was 19, I went to do an internship in Sierra Leone in West Africa. And it was really the first time that people were coming back into the country post Ebola crisis. And I got involved in a project where we are trying to compile oral histories of people who were child soldiers in the Sierra Leonean Civil War. And then obviously also their experiences with the Ebola crisis. And as I was like simultaneously chronicling their stories in all of my free time and also like actually working in the international NGO sector, I was like, oh, I think I think my future plans have got to change. I think I would rather be on the outside writing and holding accountable than I would be on the inside. And then I got really lucky and I got offered the Howard Fellowship at the University of Maryland, um, which funded me to go and learn about investigative journalism and data journalism. And I worked for them while I was there. And then the Howard Center offered me this continuing fellowship where I'm now here for a year doing this work here. And I'm really grateful because I think this is what I was supposed to be doing from the beginning.
Wonderful. How about you, Yanqi?
Yeah, so I came into journalism uh, kind of just by accident, and it's funny because I started in international news and producing newscasts, and I was telling people like, oh, well, you should know about this, thing happening in, faraway countries. Why would you care? And so um, I stumbled upon this project by NPR actually. This is called Planet Money Makes a T-shirt, and it's a project that follows the production of a you know crowdsourced T-shirt actually. So it's really interesting. So their listeners uh, basically funded that project so people like the producers followed this bale of cotton from Mississippi to Colombia, the country, and Bangladesh to see what it's like to work in those factories producing t-shirts and follow the containers, the shipping containers all the way to the
Interesting.
end product. And so I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Like it just made me care so much about this freaking t-shirt. So um I think the highest calling, for me personally, as a journalist, is to be able to make people care about things that they need to care about. And through the doing investigative reporting, I think that, I'm learning something new every time, but also I have this obligation to um, my readers, and, I need to make the stories like resonate with them, so that people previously probably not invested in this topic would actually pay attention to this because it's important. So it's this, I guess, this combination of importance and serving our communities and being a watchdog, and also uh, this fascinating aspect of storytelling, marrying shoe leather reporting with heavy use of document reporting to back up all the claims that you see. Um, I think it's really fascinating, and and again, every day is different, and kind
Hmm.
of doing investigative reporting. It's you always learn something new. And then at the end of the day, I feel like projects like this, like the Land series, we've heard a lot of good feedback that we're informing um, people. Like we kind of peeled back kind of the the layers of different LLCs who bought Nebraska land, and so that a lot of people told us that it's very important, it's public service. And so yeah, that's kind of how I view it, and I think that I still feel very fortunate that that's my job.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Go ahead.
I think we both also share sort of a unique passion, and then we developed the skills for making information available to the public that would not otherwise be available to them through public records requests, and then painstakingly cleaning and preparing it for the public to look at. Because if you wanted to, you could go out and find out who's buying Nebraska, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of very niche skills. So I think we both really enjoy being able to make that information
It
accessible
takes a
to
degree in data
the
journalism is
reader.
what helps for
Yeah.
sure. Well, there's no doubt your education has helped in all of this too, and it's very fascinating. I got just a couple of things. So, Flatwater Free Press, like this, like as I've kind of figured out who, I just started seeing these articles pop up, and I love how you publish in the newspapers and all of those things too. So it's investigative journalism, and just different folks are writing stories about Nebraska, right? Is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah, so my boss, I guess like the the big boss, Matt Wynn,
Yeah.
he my editor Matthew Hansen always jokes that Matt Wynn, who's actually just walking by, um, dr dreamt up this project, and that the Nebraska Journalism Trust, um, and he wanted to bring really good investigative news to his home state, and so he uh, started this after spending many years as a veteran journalist, like also really renowned, acclaimed data journalist, before this at USA Today, on the investigative team. So he wanted to start this statewide newsroom. At that time, we didn't have one, I don't think, like a nonprofit statewide newsroom. So, he I was one of the two reporters who got hired right off the bat to start this thing here, and I've really seen it grow so much just in the 2 years I've been here. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we do a lot of I think that our kind of slogan is Nebraska stories, important Nebraska stories, well told, so that um, it's just a opportunity for us to kind of pick up where some where some local newspapers and other broadcast media couldn't really finish or have the time to complete because of the kind of the straining resources in this industry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I sure really appreciate it, and I think it's really a little gem that Nebraska has that I've only kind of recently learned about, and I want to learn a little bit more about it, and so I might look a little bit. I'll be paying closer attention to Flatwater Free Press, and a lot of your articles here on this series, I think is what really kind of prompted that interest for me to look at that too, and I certainly hope that that more people will be paying closer attention to it. Last question here as we kind of wrap things up. So, just to kind of end on this sort of who is buying Nebraska, I would imagine, when you spend a lot of time on a story or multiple articles, I know that you carry those thoughts with you, those feelings with you, and you have a lot of it stewing over as you're kind of thinking it through and how you're going to approach something. Kind of final question here. What for each of you would you say you are now? If you've kind of wrapped up this series, at least for now, what is kind of being your big takeaway, or what would you like to be maybe a takeaway for anyone else that's listening, that's been sitting with you? Destiny, do you want to
I
go
think
first?
the main takeaway for me is just that there's nuance in everything. There's nuance in, what land ownership means, who's buying it, what it means that they own it. And I think that nuance um, gets lost sometimes when you distill it down to a super short story or just a minute. Um, and I was really glad to be able to bring that nuance back because we do have a platform where we can write a whole lot more words than normal and really dig into the deeper parts of reporting.
Awesome.
Yeah, I strongly agree. I think that um, going into it, it seemed like a Herculean task at first to, really clean up that data and knowing all the flaws that the data had, and but I think the editor made a pretty good point. We can like spend years like cleaning this data set up
Right.
and not getting to the bottom of everything, but we had to with this data set at hand, like we just couldn't afford to not do something about it, So that um it's kind of a balancing act. Uh we accounted for the nuance that Destiny was talking about like as best as we could, but at the same time we were um you know also doing our best to kind of convey the overarching idea, here and kind of showing the trend with the limited information we had. And so that, next time we were hoping to kind of really um, go beyond the common talking points you hear about. And then next time, it's also just to inform the public so that next time if they hear something about, say, foreign land ownership, they have the resources to know where to look, and this is a story that we've written about that they can refer to down the road, if they need more information like that. So I think it's hard but valuable work.
Absolutely. It's very valuable work. And I think, and I feel fortunate to have been able to read this, and I hope I know I'm sure that others, and I hope others will be fortunate to hear this podcast, and so be able to hear even more details and in depth from the two of you too. So thank you so much, Destiny and Yanqi. I really appreciate your time today. I'm so glad to have you here, and I'll be looking forward to all your future stories.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I really appreciate Yanqi and Destiny taking time for this interview today. And I really appreciate that there's people out there who spend their time doing these types of stories so that we can be more informed. I'm thankful that we have the Flatwater Free Press supporting stories like this. And to be honest, I kind of hope to feature more of their stories on this podcast. I also hope that you've picked up on some things today and learned just a little bit more about this great state the way that I did. Have an amazing rest of your day. This is How to Speak Nebraskan.